Hi. Look at how bright the sun is, and look at my hair. What a mess. Look at you, buddy. You want some of this? I haven't eaten yet. You want some of this? Yeah, that's so nummies. Hi. I don't even know if this thing is on yet. But we'll see. Today, I've obviously washed my hair. We are going to, it's hot, oh whoa. We're going to continue reading from H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon. The story that we are reading is, follower count just kicked in, so maybe it's just started now. We are reading The Shadow Out of Time by H.P. Lovecraft. So without further ado, because time is limited, let's jump into part 2. My reabsorption into normal life was a painful and difficult process. The loss of over 5 years creates more complications than can be imagined, and in my case, there were countless matters to be adjusted. What I heard of my actions since 1908 astonished and disturbed me, but I tried to view the matter as philosophically as I could. At last, regaining custody of my second son, Wingate, I settled down with him in the Crane Street house and endeavored to resume my teaching, my old professorship having been kindly offered by the college. Oh, Jesus. If you know, you know, there you are propped up on an ice pack so that you don't overheat. The little pop it makes every time always freaks me out, and you almost fell. So that would have been awful. Also, where the fuck were we? Ugh. It's The Shadow over Innsmouth. Okay. Do. We're just going to find where we were. Part 2. Okay, kindly offered me by my college. Ugh. I began work with the February 1914 term and kept at it just a year. By that time, I realized how badly my experience had shaken me. Though perfectly sane, I hoped, and with no flaw in my original personality, I had not the nervous energy of the old days. Vague dreams and queer ideas continually haunted me, and when the outbreak of the World War turned my mind to history, I found myself thinking of periods and events in the oddest possible fashion. My conception of time, my ability to distinguish between consecutiveness and simultaneousness, seemed subtly disordered, so that I formed chimerical notions about living in one age and casting one's mind all over eternity for knowledge of past and future ages. The war gave me strange impressions of remembering some of its far-off consequences, as if I knew how it was coming out and could look back upon it in the light of future information. All such quasi-memories were attended with much pain, and with a feeling that some artificial psychological barrier was set against them. When I diffidently hinted to others about my impressions, I met with varied responses. Some persons looked uncomfortably at me, but men in the mathematics department spoke of new developments in those theories of relativity, then discussed only in learned circles, which were later to become so famous. Dr. Albert Einstein, they said, was rapidly reducing time to the status of a mere dimension. But the dreams and disturbed feelings gained on me, so that I had to drop my regular work in 1915. Certain of the impressions were taking an annoying shape, giving me the persistent notion that my amnesia had formed some unholy sort of exchange, that the secondary personality had indeed been an intruding force from unknown regions, and that my own personality had suffered displacement. Thus I was driven to vague and frightful speculations concerning the whereabouts of my true self during the years that another had held my body. The curious knowledge and strange conduct of my body's late tenant troubled me more and more, as I learned further details from persons, papers, and magazines. Queerness that had baffled others seemed to harmonize terribly with some background of black knowledge which festered in the chasms of my subconsciousness. I began to search feverishly for every scrap of information bearing on the studies and travels of that other one during the dark years. Not all of my troubles were as semi-abstract as this. There were the dreams, and these seemed to grow in vividness and concreteness. Knowing how most would regard them, I seldom mentioned them to anyone but my son or certain trusted psychologists, but eventually I commenced a scientific study of other cases in order to see how typical or non-typical such visions might be among amnesia victims. My results, aided by psychologists, historians, anthropologists, and mental specialists of wide experience, and by a study that included all records of split personalities, from the days of demonic possession legends to the medically realistic present, at first bothered me more than they consoled me. I soon found that my dreams had, indeed, no counterpart in the overwhelming bulk of true amnesia cases. There remained, however, a tiny residue of accounts which, for years, baffled and shocked me with their parabolism to my own experience. Some of them were bits of ancient folklore. Others were case histories in the annals of medicine. One or two were anecdotes obscurely buried in standard histories. I'm just going to have a little bite of my snack. Dog hairs on it, of course there is. It thus appeared that, while my special kind of affliction was prodigiously rare, instances of it had occurred at long intervals ever since the beginning of men's annals. Some centuries might contain 1, 2, or 3 cases, others none, or at least none whose record survived. The essence was always the same: a person of keen thoughtfulness seized with a strange secondary life, and leading for a greater or lesser period an utterly alien existence, typified at first by vocal and bodily awkwardness, and later by a wholesale acquisition of scientific, historic, artistic, and anthropological knowledge. An acquisition carried on with fervish zest and with a wholly abnormal absorptive power. What a word. I think I'm going to take these off because more often than not they give me a headache when they're on my head like that. God, it's everywhere. It's huge. Okay. And by that I mean my hair. Then a sudden return of the rightful consciousness, intermittently plagued ever after with vague, unplaceable dreams, suggesting fragments of some hideous memory elaborately blotted out. And the close resemblance of those nightmares to my own, even in some of the smallest particulars, left no doubt in my mind of their significantly typical nature. 1 or 2 of the cases had an added ring of faint, blasphemous familiarity, as if I had heard of them before through some cosmic channel too morbid and frightful to contemplate. Hello. Oh God, what is going on with this today? Whatever. In 3 instances, there was specific mention of such an unknown machine as had been in my house before the second change. Another thing that worried me during my investigation was the somewhat greater frequency of cases where a brief, elusive glimpse of the typical nightmares was afforded to persons not visited with well-defined amnesia. These persons were largely of mediocre mind or less, some so primitive that they could scarcely be thought of as vehicles for abnormal scholarship and preternatural mental acquisitions. For a second, they would be fired with alien force, then a backward lapse and a thin, swift-fading memory of unhuman horrors. There had been at least 3 such cases during the past half-century, only 15 years before. Had something been groping blindly through time from some unsuspected abyss in nature? Were these faint cases monstrous, sinister experiments of a kind of authorship utterly beyond sane belief? Such were a few of the formless speculations of my weaker hours, fancies abetted by myths which my studies uncovered. For I could not doubt but that certain persistent legends of immemorial antiquity, apparently unknown to the victims and physicians connected with recent amnesia cases, formed a striking and awesome elaboration of memory lapses such as mine. Of the nature of the dreams and impressions which were growing so calamitous, I still almost fear to speak. They seemed to savor of madness, and at times I believed I was indeed going mad. Was there a special type of delusion afflicting those who had suffered lapses of memory? Conceivably, the efforts of the subconscious mind to fill up a perplexing blank with pseudo-memories might give rise to strange imaginative vagaries. Messy hair? Yeah, it's a mess. Yeah, it's... Sorry, I just got a spam text. Yes, my hair is a mess. I don't know what is going on with it. But oh well. This indeed, though an alternative folklore theory finally seemed to me more plausible, was the belief of many of the alienists who helped me in my search for parallel cases, and who shared my puzzlement at the exact resemblances sometimes discovered. They did not call the condition pure insanity, but classed it rather among neurotic disorders. My course in trying to track down and analyze it, instead of vainly seeking to dismiss or forget it, they heartily endorsed as correct according to the best psychological principles. I especially valued the advice of such physicians as had studied me during my possession by the other personality. My first disturbances were not visual at all, but concerned the more abstract matters which I have mentioned. There was, too, a feeling of profound and inexplicable horror concerning myself. I developed a queer fear of seeing my own form, as if my eyes would find it something utterly alien and inconceivably abhorrent. When I did glance down and behold the familiar human shape in quiet gray or blue clothing, I felt always a curious relief, though in order to gain this relief I had to conquer an infinite dread. I shunned mirrors as much as possible, and was always shaved at the barber's. It was a long time before I correlated any of these disappointed feelings with the fleeting visual impressions which began to develop. The first such correlation had to do with the odd sensation of an external, artificial restraint on my memory. I felt that the snatches of sight I experienced had a profound and terrible meaning, and a frightful connection with myself, but that some purposeful influence held me from grasping the meaning and that connection. Then came that queerness about the element of time, and with it, desperate efforts to place the fragmentary dream glimpses in the chronological and spatial pattern. The glimpses themselves were at first merely strange rather than horrible. I would seem to be in an enormous vaulted chamber whose lofty stone groinings were well nigh lost in the shadows overhead. In whatever time or place the scene may be, the principle of the arch was known as fully and used as extensively as by the Romans. How goes the day? The day goes good. How is your day? Thanks for being here. They were colossal rounded windows with high arched doors and pedestals or tables each as tall as the height of an ordinary room. Vast shelves of dark wood lined the walls, holding what seemed to be volumes of immense size with strange hieroglyphs on their backs. The exposed stonework held curious carvings, always in curvilinear mathematical designs, and were the chiseled inscriptions in the characters, and there were chiseled inscriptions in the same characters that the huge books bore. The dark granite masonry was of a monstrous megalithic type, with lines of convex toppled blocks fitting the concave bottomed courses which rested upon them. There were no chairs, but the tops of the vast pedestals were littered with books, papers, and what seemed to be writing materials, oddly figured jars of a purplish metal and rods with stained tips. Tall as the pedestals were, I seemed at times able to view them from above. On some of them were great globes of luminous crystal serving as lamps, and inexplicable machines formed of vitreous tubes and metal rods. Vitreous tubes. God. The windows were glazed and latticed with stout-looking bars. Though I dared not approach and peer out of them, I could see from where I was the waving tops of singular fern-like growths. The floor was of massive octagonal flagstones, while rugs and hangings were entirely lacking. Later, I had visions of sweeping through cyclopean corridors of stone and up and down gigantic inclined planes of the same monstrous masonry. There were no stairs anywhere, nor was any passageway less than 30 feet wide. Some of the structures through which I floated must have towered in the sky for thousands of feet. There were multiple levels of black vaults below, and never-opened trapdoors, sealed down with metal bands and holding dim suggestions of some special peril. I seemed to be a prisoner, and horror hung broodingly over everything I saw. I felt that the mocking curvilinear hieroglyphs on the walls would blast my soul with their message were I not guarded by a merciful ignorance. Still later, my dreams included vistas from the great round windows and from the titanic flat roof with its curious gardens, wide barren area, and high scalloped parapet of stone to which the topmost of the inclined planes led. Thousands of feet of structures. Yeah. There were almost endless leagues of giant buildings, each in its garden and ranged along paved roads fully 200 feet wide. They differed greatly in aspect, but few were less than 500 feet square or 1,000 feet high. Many seemed so limitless that they must have had a frontage of several thousand feet, while some shot up to mountainous altitudes in the gray, steamy heavens. They seemed to be mainly of stone or concrete, and most of them embodied the oddly curvilinear type of masonry noticeable in the building that held me. Roofs were flat and garden-covered and tended to have scalloped parapets. Sometimes there were terraces on higher levels and wide, cleared spaces amidst the gardens. The great roads held hints of motion, but in the earlier visions I could not resolve this impression into details. Do you know about this book? I also don't know about this book. In certain places I beheld enormous dark cylindrical towers which climbed far above any of the other structures. These appeared to be of a totally unique nature and showed signs of prodigious age and dilapidation. They were built of a bizarre type of square-cut basalt masonry and tapered slightly towards their rounded tops. Nowhere in any of them could the least traces of windows or other apertures save huge doors be found. I noticed also some lower buildings, all crumbling with the weathering of eons, which resembled these dark cylindrical towers in basic architecture. Around all these aberrant piles of square-cut masonry, there hovered an inexplicable aura of menace and concentrated fear, like that bred by the sealed trapdoors. The omnipresent gardens were almost terrifying in their strangeness, with bizarre and unfamiliar forms of vegetation nodding over broad paths lined with curiously carven monoliths. Abnormally vast fern-like growths predominated, some green and some of a ghastly fungoid pallor. Among them rose great spectral things resembling calamities. Calamites? Among them rose great spectral things resembling calamites, whose bamboo-like trunks towered to fabulous heights. Then there were tufted forms like fabulous cycades and grotesque dark green shrubs and trees of coniferous aspect. Big words for Elmo today. Flowers were small, colorless, and unrecognizable, blooming in geometrical beds and at large among the greenery. In a few of the terrace and rooftop gardens were larger and more vivid blossoms of almost offensive contours and seeming to suggest artificial breeding. Fungi of inconceivable size, outlines, and colors speckled the scene in patterns bespeaking some unknown but well-established horticultural tradition. In the larger gardens on the ground, there seemed to be some attempt to preserve the irregularities of nature, but on the roofs there was more selectiveness and more evidences of the topiary art. The skies were almost always moist and cloudy, and sometimes I would seem to witness tremendous rains. Once in a while, though, there would be glimpses of the sun, which looked abnormally large, and of the moon, whose markings held a touch of difference from the normal that I could never quite fathom. Calamites are trees like ferns. Thank you. When, very rarely, the night sky was clear to any extent, I beheld constellations which were nearly beyond recognition. Known outlines were sometimes approximated, but seldom duplicated. And, when I learned how to flip a page, from the position of the few groups I could recognize, I felt I must be in the Earth's southern hemisphere, near the Tropic of Capricorn. The far horizon was always steamy and indistinct, but I could see the great jungles of unknown tree ferns, calamites, lepidodendro, and sigillaria. Maybe, lay outside the city, their fantastic frontage waving mockingly in the shifting vapors. Now and then there would be suggestions of motions in the sky, but these my early visions never resolved. By the autumn of 1914, I began to have infrequent dreams of strange floatings over the city and through the regions round it. I saw interminable roads through forests of fearsome growths with mottled, flooded, and banded trunks, and past other cities as strange as the one which persistently haunted me. I saw monstrous constructions of black or iridescent stone in glades and clearings where perpetual twilight reigned, and traversed long causeways over swamps so dark that I could tell but little of their moist, towering vegetation. Once I saw an area of countless miles strewn with age-blasted basaltic ruins whose architecture had been like that of the few windowless, round-topped towers in the haunting city. And once I saw the sea, a boundless, steamy expanse beyond the colossal stone piers of an enormous town of domes and arches. Great shapeless suggestions of shadow moved over it, and here and there its surface was vexed with anomalous spoutings. Big words today. Is the book just saying everything is huge and large and giant, basically? That chapter was, yeah. This is the Necronomicon by H.P. Lovecraft. The story is The Shadow Out of Time. Hi to everyone that is here. I hope everyone is having a great day. We are going to continue on to part 2 now. My hair's a mess, but that's never anything new. Okay, part 3. As I have said, it was not immediately that these wild visions began to hold their terrifying quality. Certainly, many persons have dreamed intrinsically stranger things compounded of unrelated scraps of daily life, pictures, and readings, and arranged in fantastically novel forms by the unchecked caprices of sleep. For some time, I accepted the visions as natural, even though I had never before been an extravagant dreamer. Many of the vague anomalies, I argued, must have come from trivial sources too numerous to track down, while others seemed to reflect a common textbook knowledge of the plants and other conditions of the primitive world of 150 million years ago, in the world of the Permian or Triassic Age. In the course of some months, however, the element of terror did figure with accumulating force. This was when the dreams began so unfailingly to have the aspect of memories, and when my mind began to link them with my growing abstract disturbances. The feeling of mnemonic restraint, the curious impressions regarding time, the sense of a loathsome exchange with my secondary personality of 1908 to 13, and, considerably later, the inexplicable loathing of my own person. Hair looks amazing. Thank you. I've messed with it a lot, so this, I'm hoping it just kind of stays like this, because this looks fine. As certain definite details began to enter the dreams, their horror increased 1,000-fold, until, by October 1915, I felt I must do something. It was then that I began an intensive study of other cases of amnesia and visions, feeling that I might thereby objectivize my trouble and shake clear of its emotional grip. However, as before mentioned, the result was at first almost exactly opposite. It disturbed me vastly to find that my dreams had been so closely duplicated, especially since some of the accounts were too early to admit of any geological knowledge, and, therefore, of any idea of primitive landscapes on the subject's part. What is more, many of these accounts supplied very horrible details and explanations in connection with the visions of great buildings and jungle gardens, and other things. The actual sights and vague impressions were bad enough, but what was hinted or asserted by some of the other dreamers savored of madness and blasphemy. Worst of all, my own pseudo-memory was aroused to wilder dreams and hints of coming revelations. And yet, most doctors deemed my course, on the whole, an advisable one. I studied psychology systematically, and under the prevailing stimulus, my son Wingate did the same, his studies leading eventually to his present professorship. In 1917 and 18, I took special courses at Miskatonic. Meanwhile, my examination of medical, historical, and anthropological records became indefatigable, involving travels to distant libraries, and finally, including even a reading of the hideous books of forbidden lore in which my secondary personality had been so disturbingly interested. Just gonna take a break for like half a second. It's hot and it's dry. How's everyone doing? How's everyone's day? I hope everyone's having a great day. Okay, let's get back into it. Some of the latter were the actual copies I had consulted in my altered state, and I was greatly disturbed by certain marginal notations and ostensible corrections of the hideous text in a script and idiom which somehow seemed oddly human. Not too shabby. My day's good. Thanks for asking. These markings were mostly in the respective languages of the various books, all of which the writer seemed to know with equal, though obviously, academic faculty. One note appended to von Junst Ausbrichleichen Kulten, however, was alarmingly otherwise. I don't remember how I pronounced that yesterday. It consisted of certain curvilinear hieroglyphs in the same ink as that of the German corrections, but following no recognized human pattern. and these hieroglyphs were closely and unmistakably akin to the characters constantly met with in my dreams. Characters whose meaning I would sometimes momentarily fancy I knew, or was just on the brink of recalling. To complete my black confusion, many librarians assured me that, in view of previous examinations and records of consultation of the volumes in question, all of these notations must have been made by myself in my secondary state. This, despite the fact that I was and still am ignorant of 3 of the languages involved. Piecing together the scattered records, ancient and modern, anthropological and medical, I found a fairly consistent mixture of myth and hallucination, whose scope and wildness left me utterly dazed. Only one thing consoled me, the fact that the myths were of such early existence. What lost knowledge could have brought pictures of the Paleozoic and Mesozoic landscape into these primitive fables, I could not even guess. But the pictures had been there. Thus, a basis existed for the formation of a fixed type of delusion. Have you read any of this off stream, or is all of your progress on stream? All of the progress is on stream, and then when we're done, I upload the videos to my YouTube channel. So that's where the first part of this one is. Cases of amnesia no doubt created the general myth pattern, but afterwards, the fanciful accretions of the myths must have reacted on amnesia sufferers and colored their pseudo-memories. I myself had read and heard all the early tales during my memory lapse. My quest had amply proved that. Was it not natural, then, for my subsequent dreams and emotional impressions to become colored and molded by what my memory subtly held over from my secondary state? A few of the myths had significant connections with other cloudy legends of the pre-human world, especially those Hindu tales involving stupefying gulfs of time and forming part of the lore of modern theosophists. Primal myth and modern delusion joined in their assumption that mankind is only one, perhaps the least, of the highly evolved and dominant races of this planet's long and largely unknown career. Things of inconceivable shape, they implied, had reared towers to the sky and delved into every secret of nature before the first amphibian forebear of man had crawled out of the hot sea 300 million years ago. Some had come down from the stars. A few were as old as the cosmos itself. Others had arisen swiftly from terrain germs as far behind the first germs of our life cycle as those germs are behind ourselves. Spans of thousands of millions of years and linkages of other galaxies and universes were spoken of. Indeed, there was no such thing as time in its humanly accepted sense. But most of the tales and impressions concerned a relatively late race of a queer and intricate shape, resembling no life form known to science, which had lived till only 50 million years before the advent of man. This, they indicated, was the greatest race of all, because it alone had conquered the secret of time. It had learned all things that ever were known or ever would be known on the earth, through the power of its keener minds to project themselves into the past and future, even through gulfs of millions of years, and study the lore of every age. From accomplishments of this race arose all legends of prophets, including those in human mythology. In its vast libraries were volumes of texts and pictures holding the whole of Earth's annals, histories and descriptions of every species that had ever been or that ever would be, with full records of their arts, their achievements, their languages, and their psychologies. With this eon-embracing knowledge, the great race chose from every era and life form such thoughts, arts, and processes as might suit its own nature and situation. Knowledge of the past, secured through a kind of mind-casting outside the recognized senses, was harder to glean than knowledge of the future. In the latter case, the course was easier and more material. With suitable mechanical aid, a mind would project itself forward in time, feeling its dim, extrasensory way till it approached the desired period. Then, after preliminary trials, it would seize on the best discoverable representative of the highest of that period's life forms. It would enter the organism's brain and set up therein its own vibrations, while the displaced mind would strike back to the period of the displacer, remaining in the latter's body till a reverse process was set up. The projected mind in the body of the organism of the future would then pose as a member of the race whose outward form it wore, learning as quickly as possible all that could be learned of the chosen age and its massed information and techniques. Meanwhile, The displaced mind, thrown back to the displacer's age and body, would be carefully guarded. It would be kept from harming the body it occupied and would be drained of all of its knowledge by trained questioners. Often, it could be atoned in its own language when previous quests into the future had brought back records of that language. If the mind came from a body whose language the great race could not physically produce, clever machines would be made on which the alien speech could be played on as a musical instrument. The great race's members were immense rugose cones 10 feet high, and with head and other organs attached to its foot-thick distensible limbs spreading from the apexes. Gross. They spoke by the clicking or scraping of huge paws or claws attached to the end of 2 of their 4 limbs, walked by the expansion and contraction of a viscous layer attached to their vast 10-foot bases. When the captive mind's amazement and resentment had worn off, and when, assuming that it came from a body vastly different from the great race's, it had lost its horror at the unfamiliar, at its unfamiliar temporary form, it was permitted to study its new environment and experience a wonder and wisdom approximating that of its displacer. With suitable precautions and in exchange for suitable services, it was allowed to rove all over the habitable world in Titan airships or on the huge boat-like atomic engine vehicles which traversed the great roads, and to delve freely into the libraries containing the records of the planet's past and future. This reconciled many captive minds to their lot, since none were other than keen, and to such minds the unveiling of hidden mysteries of Earth, closed chapters of inconceivable pasts and dizzying vortices of future time which include the years ahead of their own natural ages, forms always, despite the abysmal horrors often unveiled, the supreme experience of life. Now and then, certain captives were permitted to meet other captive minds seized from the future, to exchange thoughts with consciousness living 100 or 1,000 or a million years before or after their own ages. And all were urged to write copiously in their own languages of themselves and their respective periods such documents to be filed in the great central archives. When she reads on stream. I read a lot of books off stream. But all of the progress in this bad boy has been done on stream, on a stream. It may be added that there was one special type of captive whose privileges were far greater than those of the majority. These were the dying permanent exiles, whose bodies in the future had been seized by keen-minded members of the great race, who, faced with death, sought to escape mental extinction. Such melancholy exiles were not as common as might be expected, since the longevity of the great race lessened its love of life, especially among those superior minds capable of projection. From cases of the permanent projection of elder minds arose many of those lasting changes of personality noticed in later history, including mankind's. As for the ordinary cases of exploration, when the displacing mind had learned what it wished in the future, it would build an apparatus like that which had started its flight and reverse the process of projection. Once more it would be in its own body, in its own age, while the lately captive mind would return to that body of the future to which it properly belonged. Only when one or the other of the bodies had died during the exchange was this restoration impossible. In such cases, of course, the exploring mind had, like those of the death escapers, to live out an alien-bodied life in the future, or else the captive mind, like the dying permanent exiles, had to end its days in the form and past age of the great race. Quite brilliant, fantastic book. I would read something else, but I do want to get through. I just did the Odyssey, so I've also read a lot of other books on the stream. Heart of Darkness I've already done. That's up on my YouTube channel. That was one of the first ones that I did. Yeah, I would read something else, but right now I'm just in Lovecraft for Halloween. This fate was less horrible when the captive mind was also of the great race, a not infrequent occurrence, since in all its periods that race was intensely concerned with its own future. The number of dying permanent exiles of the great race was very slight, largely because of the tremendous penalties attached to displacements of future great race minds by the moribund. I don't know what moribund means. What is PNIN? What is that? Tell me about it. Through projection, arrangements were made to inflict these penalties on the offending minds in their new future bodies, and sometimes forced re-exchanges were effected. Complex cases of the displacement of exploring or already captive minds by minds in various regions of the past had been known and carefully rectified. In every age since the discovery of mind projection, a minute but well-recognized element of the population consisted of great race minds from past ages, sojourning for a longer or shorter while. Oh, thank you. When a captive mind of alien origin was returned to its own body in the future, it was purged by an intricate mechanical hypnosis of all it had learned in the great race's age. This because of certain troublesome consequences inherent in the general carrying forward of knowledge in large quantities. Not as quite controversial as other works. The same brain puzzle. Why is it named like what? But thank you. I will check that out. The few existing instances of clear transmission had caused, and would cause at future known times, great disasters. And it was largely in consequence of two cases of the kind, said the old myths, that mankind had learned what it had concerning the great race. Of all things surviving physically and directly from that eon-distant world, there remained only certain ruins of great stone in far places and under the sea, and parts of the text of the frightful Nicotic manuscripts. Thus, the returning mind reached its own age with only the faintest and most fragmentary vision of what it had undergone since its seizure. All memories that could be eradicated were eradicated, so that in most cases only a dream-shadowed blank stretched back to the time of the first exchange. Some minds recalled more than others, and the chance joining of memories had, at rare times, brought hints of the forbidden past to future ages. Oh, I see. There probably never was a time when groups or cults did not secretly cherish certain of these hints. In the Necronomicon, the presence of such a cult among human beings was suggested, a cult that sometimes gave aid to minds voyaging down the eons from the days of the Great Race. And meanwhile, the Great Race itself waxed well-nigh omniscient, and turned to the task of setting up exchanges with the minds of other planets, and of exploring their pasts and futures. It sought likewise to fathom the past years and origin of that black eon-dead orb in far space, whence its own mental heritage had come, for the mind of the great race was older than its bodily form. These, the beings of a dying elder world, wise with the ultimate secrets, had looked ahead for a new world and species wherein they might have long life, and had sent their minds en masse into that future race best adapted to house them, the cone-shaped beings that peopled our earth 1 billion years ago. Thus the great race came to be, while the myriad minds sent backward were left to die in the horror of strange shapes. Later, the race would again face death, yet would live through another forward migration of its best minds into the bodies of others who had a longer physical span ahead of them. Such was the background of intertwined legend and hallucination. When, around 1920, I had my researches in coherent shape, I felt a slight lessening of the tension which their earlier stages had increased. After all, and in spite of the fancies prompted by blind emotions, were not most of my phenomena readily explainable? Any chance might have turned my mind to dark studies during the amnesia, and then I read the forbidden legends and met the members of ancient and ill-regarded cults. That, plainly, supplied the material for the dreams and disturbed feelings which came after the return of memory. As for the marginal notes in dream hieroglyphs in languages unknown to me, but laid at my door by librarians, I might easily have picked up a smattering of the tongues during my secondary state, while the hieroglyphs were doubtless coined by my fancy from descriptions in old legends, and afterwards woven into my dreams. I tried to verify certain points through conversations with known cult leaders, but never succeeded in establishing the right connections. At times, the parallelism of so many cases in so many distant ages continued to worry me as it first had. But on the other hand, I reflected that the extant folklore was undoubtedly more universal in the past than in the present. I'm getting hot. You see, I'm starting to sweat. I'm getting hot. The sun is bright. Probably all the other victims whose cases were like mine had a long and familiar knowledge of the tales I had learned only when in my secondary state. When these victims had lost their memory, they had associated themselves with the creatures of their household myths, the fabulous invaders supposed to displace men's minds, and had thus embarked upon quests for knowledge which they thought they could take back to a fancied non-human past. He's scooting around back there. I don't know, you can't see him, but... Then, when their memory returned, they reversed the associative process and thought of themselves as the former captive minds instead as of the displacers. Hence the dreams and pseudo-memories following the conventional myth pattern. Despite the seeming cumbrousness of these explanations, they came finally to supersede all others in my mind, largely because of the greater weakness of any rival theory. And a substantial number of eminent psychologists and anthropologists gradually agreed with me. Thinking you got a great source of natural sunlight, but I guess that does come with problems. It's great. I mean, at lunchtime it's fantastic here, but I'm hot. Real toasty right now. The more I reflected, the more convincing did my reasoning seem, till in the end I had a really effective bulwark against the visions and impressions which still assailed me. Suppose I did see strange things at night. These were only what I had heard and read of. Suppose I did have odd loathings and perspectives and pseudo-memories. These, too, were only echoes of myths absorbed in my secondary state. Nothing that I might dream, nothing that I might feel, could be of any actual significance. Fortified by this philosophy, I greatly improved in nervous equilibrium, even though my visions, rather than the abstract impressions, steadily became more frequent and more disturbingly detailed. In 1922, I felt able to undertake regular work again and put my newly gained knowledge to practical use by accepting an instructorship in psychology at the university. My old chair of political economy had been long adequately filled, besides which, methods of teaching economics had changed greatly since my heyday. My son was, at this time, just entering on the postgraduate studies leading to his present professorship, and we worked together a great deal. That is where we're going to end. So, thank you for reading with me. I hope you have a great day. I will upload this on YouTube. Look at that, I'm getting some sun. I will upload this on YouTube. It's the same name as this channel. I think it's linked in the bio. I don't know. Anyways, have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.